The sound of a mop bucket squeaking against marble stopped her in the foyer like a glass breaking in a cathedral. Amelia Hayes had expected only the hush of a Friday evening in her penthouse, the soft click of the central air, and the distant hum of traffic. But instead, she heard rhythm, a practiced cadence, a voice humming a phrase she did not recognize, and a laugh like a small bell. In the hallway light, she saw a man in a neon vest bending over a wheelchair, hands steady on a small boy who was, impossibly, stretching a cracked smile across his face. Amelia, the billionaire who bought entire floors of the hospital for research wings, stood rooted at the doorway, purse in hand, name tag on the concierge desk glittering in her memory. The janitor, Jake Miller, hired last month and mostly invisible around formal guests and glossy staff, was cradling Noah Hayes, her 6-year-old, born with a diagnosis that had shorn laughter from the house for years. Jake was not supposed to know Noah the way he seemed to know him. He was not supposed to coax sounds that no speech therapist had coaxed. Who was this man? And how could a janitor create progress where contracts, therapy sessions, and specialists had only recorded marginal gains? Stay with this story to see how a worker with dirt under his nails upended the rules of care, and what that meant for a family used to buying solutions rather than learning patience. If you love stories that show the limits of money and the power of unexpected trust, subscribe and keep watching, because the truth behind Jake is a lesson that changes everything. To understand what happened next, we have to go back and look closely at who these people really were and why this moment felt like a small revolution. Amelia had been built by numbers and negotiations. She grew up in a city apartment with a mother who taught calculus and a father who ran a small medical supply company. By the time she bought her first company at 29, she had learned to translate human problems into balance sheets and to treat emotion as a variable to be optimized. Sensory memories of Amelia include the sterile chill of boardroom air conditioning, the metallic click of fountain pens signing contracts, the citrus scent of the cafe where she wrote plans, and the rare warmth of her son Noah pressed against her chest in neonatal intensive care as alarms blinked like tiny constellations. Her backstory is not a tidy tale of privilege alone. After Noah was diagnosed with a complex neuromotor condition and an early genetic test showed a mutation that made prognosis uncertain, she poured resources into neurologists and research grants, but found herself increasingly absent while delegating care. She could name every specialist who had crossed Noah's chart: neurologist Rana Patel, developmental therapist Lena Ortiz, pediatric occupational therapist Marcus Bell, but she could not sit with Noah in the small, non-medical ways that made therapy stick. She knew how to fund a study and how to read a trial protocol, but she did not know how to coax a grin out of a child who had stopped trying to show teeth. Those early scenes shaped her decisions later. The polished veneer of the Hayes household built around predictable schedules and professional caregivers, but missing the improvisation of everyday affection. Jake Miller carried a different biography in his hands: calluses from lifting trolleys and a thrift store jacket frayed at the edges, scented with floor wax and fried plantain from the food truck he favored. He had grown up in a foster home that prized reliability above talk, where silence was currency and helping was how you kept people alive. When he was 16, he volunteered at a community center and learned basic physical reinforcement techniques with children who had developmental delays. Later, he joined a vocational program and trained as a rehabilitation aide, working nights at a county clinic where he learned to read small cues: a clenched jaw, a delayed blink, a sigh that came before a shutdown. Jake had also been a single father to a daughter who now lived with his sister Rosa in Queens and who called him every Sunday without fail. Jake's backstory includes the smell of bleach and baby powder, the sound of fluorescent lights buzzing in overnight clinics, the texture of worn upholstery in waiting rooms, and the taste of cheap coffee sipped while charting notes in broken handwriting. He had once been certified in a short course labeled Pediatric Support and had volunteered at Hopewell Community Center teaching basic mobility games, using furniture made into obstacle courses with pillows and tables like improvised therapy. Nobody at the Hayes household had asked for that history on his application, and nobody expected him to bring it into the living room the way he did. Noah was small and fierce, a boy whose world had been mapped in textures and rhythms rather than sight or easy speech. He lived in a universe defined by the tactile, the smell of Amelia's lavender hand cream, the soothing tick of a therapy clock, the taste of mashed peaches during feeding sessions. His body had been a stubborn instrument, refusing conventional tuning, yet responding in small increments to touch and sound. Backstory for Noah includes the soft slap of his shoes on a driveway that once became a series of steps he could not climb, the plastic of his favorite toy car that never quite fit his hand, the bright bands of color Amelia would tape to the wall to encourage eye tracking. Therapists had logged micro-progress like tiny bank deposits: increased head turn, a louder vowel, a half-second of independent reach. But those gains felt brittle and strategic, like rehearsed lines, not the spontaneous joy that had first made Amelia fall in love with the idea of motherhood. Noah's story has medical notes and personal rituals, a laundry list of sessions, dietary changes, adaptive chairs, and devices purchased with love and calculation. He carried within him a capacity to respond that had been waiting for someone who saw beyond schedules and protocols to a sequence of human connection. The house that night smelled of lemon cleaner and warm bread from the kitchen, a juxtaposition of domestic comfort and clinical order. Jake hummed a low tune while counting breaths and tapping Noah's palm to a rhythm. Amelia stepped forward, voice sharp with shock and a question. "Jake, what are you doing with my son?" she asked. Jake looked up, hands steady, voice calm. "I am helping him find his voice, ma'am," he said. "You can't sing to him. He has therapy this afternoon," Amelia shot back. "I know the schedule," Jake replied. "I also know how to make the muscles remember a melody and a touch." Amelia folded her arms and tried to summon authority. "Do you have a background in therapy?" she demanded. Jake hesitated, then said, "I have experience, ma'am. I worked nights with kids like Noah at Hopewell. I learned to do simple proprioceptive games." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "You are the janitor," she said, as if the word were a verdict. "I am the man who is here when the house is empty," Jake answered softly. "And sometimes the best therapy is repetition and attention, not devices and contracts." The exchange continued with more questions and answers, each line revealing another shade of doubt or empathy. "Where did you learn to do that?" Amelia asked. "At Hopewell, with Marcus and Lena, and a volunteer course with Dr. Patel," Jake replied. "Why did you not tell us?" Amelia demanded. "Because I thought you did not hire me for that, and because Noah calmed down," Jake said, "and this house felt quiet, and he looked like he needed a hand, not an appointment." The back and forth stretched into 10 exchanges, 8 of them probing identity and intent, and each line layered with sound: the scrape of shoes, the soft tick of a clock, the distant elevator bell. Sensory details built a pattern Amelia could not immediately place: drywall smell under the citrus burst, the cling of the neon vest, the softness of Noah's breath against Jake's palm, the tiny wet exhale of a smile in a child relearning pleasure. Curiosity became a cautious investigation. Amelia did the thing she always did: investigate, procure facts, assemble credentials. She asked Marcus, the head of staff, for Jake's files. She called Dr. Rana Patel at the hospital to verify whether any volunteer course had been offered and who was on its roster. She watched footage from a nanny cam placed in the playroom that Marcus had for oversight and saw a loop repeated: Jake guiding Noah through a sequence, 1, 2, 3, tapping a foam ball on a pillow, counting with his voice, Noah answering, sometimes with a squeaked consonant, sometimes with breath, but always with eyes brightening as if trying to hold on to a new map. Sensory notes in the footage were striking: the low creak of the couch, the faint clatter of cutlery from the kitchen, the way sunlight pooled on the floor in stripes, each stripe like a bar on Noah's chart. Amelia visited Hopewell Community Center under a false pretext to avoid confronting him in anger, and found a cluttered room with chairs stacked like ships and a sink full of mugs. The walls crowded with artwork from children, with stickers peeling, and the smell of instant coffee.
There she met Lena Ortiz, Marcus Bell, Omar Khalid, and Sophie Nang, who all used Jake's name like an emblem. "He built ramps," Lena said. "He taught us how to use furniture to make mobility playful." Marcus nodded. "He fixed toys. He stayed late. He did the dirty jobs no one wanted, and then he sat with the kids until they opened up," Sophie added. "He kept attendance, and he taught a mother how to tie a therapy band." Amelia listened, shifting between fiscal skepticism and a rising sense of something she had not funded, a grassroots competence that no balance sheet had captured. At this point, the narrative turns to a revelation that challenges assumptions. Jake produced certificates he had tucked away in a battered wallet, a short vocational rehab credential, letters from Hopewell praising his dependability, notes from a pediatric occupational therapist who had supervised his volunteer work. He explained in his own words how a neighbor had taught him a tactile mapping exercise, how the community had cobbled together therapy tools from donated furniture, and how he had practiced those sequences until muscle memory was as reliable as a clock. "I am not a doctor," he said. "I am a man who learns by doing and by staying. I learned how the smallest touch could wake a muscle and how to scaffold a movement until it becomes a habit." Amelia listened and felt the familiar ground of power shift, the way tectonic plates finally move and release pressure. She offered him a curious proposition, a formal role that blurred lines between maintenance and therapy, a funded pilot program to integrate volunteers like Jake into structured rehabilitation sessions supported by professionals. "We can give you training," she said. "We can build a contract and a schedule and find you insurance coverage." Jake shook his head. "I just want to help Noah, and if help comes with rules, I will learn them." Their exchange included technical points about liability, credentials, and documentation, and Amelia found herself bargaining not from superiority, but from a nascent humility. The revelation here was not only Jake's hidden skills, but the possibility that community knowledge could be formalized into credible therapy. Then came the setback, a scene that could have undone months of fragile trust. During the session in which Jake attempted a new transfer technique, Noah slipped a fraction of an inch.
Fell against a corner of a coffee table, a sudden sound like a dropped glass. Amelia heard it from the kitchen and ran. The boy cried, a keening, guttural sound that cut through the house, and the staff rushed in. In the emergency room, Dr. Patel examined Noah and found a minor fracture and a bruise that required a splint and a brief hospital stay. Staff whispered about negligence, and Marcus wrote an incident report that read clinical and cold. The board of the foundation Amelia chaired called for immediate suspension pending review, and contracts creaked. Jake sat in a small office with his head in his hands, and Rosa called him on the phone, voice tight. "Jake, are you okay?" she asked. He answered in a bare whisper, "I did not mean for this to happen." The legal team questioned his qualifications, and a neighbor started a rumor that a janitor had no business near therapy. The house grew divided, with voices accusing and defending, tensions flaring between those who saw Jake as a hero and those who saw him as reckless. This crisis tested the fragile alliance between compassion and protocol, and it forced Amelia to ask whether progress justified risk and whether trust could be earned and measured by more than certificates. 3 moments of tension followed, each like a tightening knot in the narrative, and each demanded careful description. First tension moment, a board meeting, with lights too bright and a projector humming. Amelia sat across from directors, and the word liability echoed the air. The director, Henry Cole, said, "We cannot expose the institution to risk." Amelia replied, "We cannot deny humanity because we fear litigation." The room smelled of cold coffee and paper, and the debate became a moral arithmetic. Second tension moment, a neighborhood protest, led by a parent whose child had had a bad outcome years earlier. She held a handwritten sign and shouted questions into a camera. The community center door felt slammed. The sound of a chant made the building vibrate, and Jake stood silent, unable to answer the old wounds of public distrust. Third tension moment, in Noah's hospital room, Amelia sat by his bed and watched monitors flicker. The air filled with antiseptic, and the telephone pulsed with messages about contracts, and the child reached for Jake's hand, though Jake had been suspended. And that small reaching gesture was a verdict the boy gave to the man who had steadied him, not a legal committee. Each of these moments lasted in time and in description. The smell of disinfectant, the creak of a gurney, the clack of a phone being silenced, the texture of a hospital blanket. At the nadir, a professional accusation was filed, an anonymous complaint citing improper technique and lack of certification. Amelia faced pressure from attorneys and publicists to cut ties and avoid headlines. Yet the clinical facts complicated the easy decision. Dr. Rana Patel reviewed Noah's records and identified that the incident had
been more an accident of environment than a willful act, and recommended a review process that included retraining, supervision, and documented protocols rather than firing. Lena Ortiz advocated for a hybrid approach. "We need to harness what he offers and mitigate risk," she said. Amelia convened a meeting and assembled a team that now included Jake, officially, Dr. Patel, Lena, Marcus, Rosa, Sophie, and Omar Khalid, a community liaison. They designed a step-by-step protocol, a short 300-word procedural outline for integrating volunteers into therapy sessions, covering supervision ratios, documentation of progress, and graded responsibilities. Each item pragmatic, clear, and oriented towards safety, not exclusion. They trained Jake in specific transfer techniques under Lena's supervision and began structured sessions with Noah where every movement was scaffolded and measured. The process smelled of new cleaning supplies, lemon and eucalyptus, the tape of measuring devices stuck to toy chests, the feel of soft therapy bands under hands. Progress resumed, not as a miracle, but as a disciplined accumulation of small gains. What followed was a collaborative reinvention of care. Amelia funded a pilot program at Hopewell Community Center, creating a paid role called Community Rehabilitation Aide, a hybrid position that blended Jake's practical knowledge with formal training and supervision. The team expanded to include a therapist in residence, a partnership with a local university, and a fellowship for community workers. Meetings in the Hayes home were full of people with different vocabularies discussing the same child. "Less device, more touch," Jake would say. "We need data and compassion," Dr. Patel would counter, and then add, "both are non-negotiable." They designed exercises that used furniture and music and food textures to encourage motor planning, and they tracked progress with both numbers and narratives. Noah began to produce intentional sounds, then phrases. Each therapy session a careful choreography of touch, sight, and rhythm. The team named small wins as if they were milestones, a measurable step forward, a smile held for 3 seconds, an independent reach of the spoon to his mouth. Secondary characters played visible roles. Rosa checked attendance and comfort, Sophie organized donated toys, Marcus fixed ramps, and Omar secured community funding. Henry Cole wrote a cautious endorsement, and Mayor Alvarez visited Hopewell to announce a small grant. The household learned to put aside hierarchy and to make decisions in rooms that smelled like coffee and rubber mats and warm apples baked in the kitchen. Approximately 1/3 into this story, now pause for a moment of reflection. If you are feeling a tightening in your chest, know you are not alone. This is the part where many of us recognize truth before we convince ourselves with reason. Share in the comments if you have ever been surprised by someone who seemed ordinary and ended up being essential. Type yes, and in one sentence tell us who that person was. Or if you have not been surprised, write waiting and say who you would like to have that kind of unexpected helper. Your stories remind others that skill and compassion are not always visible, and they help shape future episodes we make about people who change lives quietly. The community here learns from each story, and sometimes we feature the best ones to show how everyday acts scale into community programs. Now back to Amelia, Noah, and Jake.
As the trial period continued, the days blurred into repeated sequences. The sensory world of therapy became an atlas of small markers. 3 specific moments of tension, articulated detail, and each tested the system. The first was a public hearing, where a parent accused the program of bypassing professional norms. The hall was humid with camera lights, the echo of hushed voices, and Amelia stood to defend a program she had begun as a tentative experiment. "We have documentation," she said. "We have supervision and trained personnel." The accuser repeated anecdotes about poor outcomes, and the crowd broke into a murmur. The second moment was a late night when Noah woke inconsolable, and a new movement technique failed to soothe him. Jake sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling with responsibility. "I should have known better," he whispered, and then remembered a step Lena had taught him, and tried again. The boy calmed with a sound like a small bell, and Jake let out a breath like someone released after holding underwater. The third moment was an audit by a regulatory board that inspected papers and training logs. The fluorescent lights of the conference room made the paper sheen bright, and Amelia felt both exposed and strangely proud when the auditors noted that the program had robust record-keeping and community outcomes. The auditors asked about scalability, and Jake answered honestly about community values, not metrics, and his candor shifted the room. As progress accumulated, the household and the community began to integrate learnings into routines. Children at Hopewell used improvised ramps and sensory bins made from donated goods, with labels and checklists attached. Volunteers like Jake were given a ladder of responsibilities and formal training hours. Amelia unlearned assumptions about control and discovered a new kind of leadership, one that listened more and centralized less. The project brought in students from the university who logged data and wrote methodical reports on motor planning and social engagement, and the partnership legitimized the community methods. Therapists wrote papers referencing the pilot, and the local paper ran a profile on Hopewell highlighting how low-cost interventions improved quality of life and reduced hospital readmissions. Noah's chart changed in ways both numeric and narrative. He went from assisted steps to standing with support, and then to taking a few independent strides in the living room. The first time he did it, Jake, who had been watching, sat in the doorway crying quietly, and Rosa took his hand and squeezed. The epilogue unfolds in 3 snapshots, 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months later, each showing consequence and legacy. 1 month later, the house was quieter in a different way. Noah adapted to a cast and a splint, but the team had built in alternate activities. Amelia had redistributed her schedule to be present for more sessions. The pilot program at Hopewell had 2 paid aides and an official curriculum, and Amelia appeared at a community meeting with a modest speech where she admitted she had underestimated the value of community wisdom. There was a sense of regained trust, a community of parents who had been skeptical now attending sessions and bringing their children. The smell of the center had new layers, chalk and baked bread, and the sound of music adapted for movement. 3 months later, Hopewell had formalized partnerships with 2 pediatric clinics, and the pilot program reported measurable improvement in gross motor function scores among participating children. Jake had transitioned from janitor to community rehabilitation aide, on payroll with a contract and basic insurance, and he taught a weekly session for new volunteers. Marcus and Sophie managed logistics, and Lena offered supervision hours. Amelia had launched a small grant to seed similar programs in nearby neighborhoods, and the local university began a study to publish the method. The social impact was visible. New mothers arrived carrying babies in slings, asking questions, and older volunteers came in with cups of soup and hands willing to learn. 6 months later, Noah walked into a community room at Hopewell with a grin that had become habitual. He pushed a toy car across a mat and waved at Jake, who clapped from the back of the room. The program served 50 children a week and had a waiting list. The city gave a small municipal award to the initiative, and Mayor Alvarez invited Amelia and Jake to a ceremony, where both spoke not as strangers, but as partners. The legacy extended beyond numbers.
It changed hiring practices at private homes and hospitals, where community rehabilitation aides were now a recognized job title. Contracts included supervised volunteer hours, and the language of therapy broadened to include tactile and improvisational methods. The final image is simple and sensory. The smell of paint on newly installed ramps, the feel of handrails warm under small palms, the sound of many small laughs in a room where hope had been organized into practical steps. In the end, Amelia learned that influence without listening can only purchase solutions for so long, and that the sustained work of care often lives in hands that do the dirty jobs and in the patient accumulation of small, consistent acts. Jake learned how to translate grit into formal practice, and the community learned to value knowledge that is born from staying. Noah learned to move to his own tune, and his laughter became less like a rare ping and more like something that arrived without apology. If this story moved you, please share in the comments an instance where someone ordinary became essential, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that rehabilitation can be therapy, and therapy can be revolution, and that the most meaningful progress is built on trust. Remember this last line. Sometimes the person who cleans the floor is the one who helps you stand.